large, too large to be managed one way, but too small to be managed another way. So she finds herself in this liminal space, right? Trying to figure out how to organize leadership and use the gifts of the congregation. But she's overwhelmed. She could easily work 60 to 70 hours a week and just feel as if she's not doing enough. But the truth is that her soul is tired. She's very, very tired. When I asked her, what do you most need to take care of yourself? She said, sleep.
Mm,
So I think things are moving so quickly and the demands on clergy are extensive. And then with families thrown in there, it's even more of a demand. So how do we support clergy in their efforts to set boundaries, set priorities, and give themselves permission to say no?
mm. Yeah. So
No to the rush.
yeah.
Yeah,
So church is so hard because there's so much you feel like you have to learn and grow. And as you're doing that, things change.
all the time. All the
Yeah.
time.
And
Yeah.
so as you know, other than just getting some good rest and some of those self-care things, um,
Mhm.
what else can a minister do with this sort of this challenge of the fact that the culture is changing
Mhm.
so
Well,
fast?
I think it requires a little bit of both perspective or insight and a little bit of muscle to try something new, maybe that we haven't done before. And I would call that it fits broadly into the category of adaptive leadership, Nick. So
Adapt, yeah, good.
adaptive leadership. So we're talking about Ron Heifetz, getting up on the balcony with leaders, kind of looking out and having a different perspective, and also trusting that the Holy Spirit is at work here, even in what seems to be rushed, chaotic, and maybe even a time of deconstruction, that the Holy Spirit is at work to create a new thing. And in order to lean into that, I think it does require using maybe a different muscle than we have before, rather than trying to build up program or to stay with the way something has always been, to relax into more of an organic model and just take a step back, work with leadership to breathe, to pray, to wait, and to discern together what the Holy Spirit is lifting up as important within the life of a congregation, rather than just saying, "Oh yeah, we've done it this way, it's worked this way," and keeping on. So
Yeah,
I encourage people to be curious and creative and to try some holy experiments that may fail. So what? Um, instead of committees, try a commission. What does a commission look like? Experiment, talk about that with your leadership. What if we did this instead of that? It's not the end of the world, it's just an experiment.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It sounds like what you're saying is that instead of running harder
Yeah.
in the same ways, it's asking the question, um, maybe the answer isn't just more pastoral effort.
Exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
I feel like, you know, their ministers are more capable, more knowledgeable than ever, but they're still feeling more exhausted, more. And
Mm-hmm.
so sounds like you're suggesting that maybe the changing the method, not just, you
Mm-hmm.
know, rehashing it and trying to do better the thing that used to work.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So for people who don't know adaptively, because that's not something I learned in seminary.
No,
uh,
me either.
I'm old enough. I don't know if seminaries now are teaching it. But if people don't know what adaptive leadership is, how would you define that? What's at the core of what it means to be an adaptive leader versus another leader?
I would say it's an awareness of the kind of the multifaceted nature of leadership. Let's take leadership style, for example, Nick. There is authoritarian, there's collaborative, there's uh oh gosh, help me out. There's hands off completely, and then there's one there are different styles. That's what I'm getting at.
Permissive.
Yeah, yeah. So there are like four different styles. Almost all of us have a preference, right?
Yeah.
So if you've always led from your preference, but you have an awareness that there are other leadership styles, maybe this would be an opportunity to try a different style of leadership.
Hmm.
Maybe you've always been kind of laissez-faire, hands off, and you go into a church setting and people don't respond to that. They feel kind of lost. They need direction. So you could come in with more of a collaborative approach where you're working with them, or the coaching, that's the fourth one, the coaching approach, where you come in and you establish what a norm is for them as leaders, and then you sort of move back out and let them do the work. Or do they need collaborative where you're there with them? I think the authoritative style is different because that's kind of top down. So you want to use that a little more gently and less frequently in leadership. But sometimes you need to be the heavy one, the heavyweight. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's can be really hard for ministers to think about leading differently, to like move between these different styles.
Right.
And maybe there's some fears about from, will the congregants respect me? Will they see me as a leader if
Mhm.
I don't have all the answers?
Exactly.
Or if I do? Like, I mean, there's some churches that are like, "Well, I don't, I don't want you to tell me what to do." And,
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
pastors feel really stuck when they're like,
Hmm.
"Well, how are we going to move forward?" So, what are
Hmm.
some of the tools in adaptive leadership that helps congregations and ministers sort of effectively walk between these different styles?
I think communication is huge. I think that's just essential. The more clarity you can share with people, the less anxiety they're going to have during times of change.
Hmm.
So even if you say to them, we are going through a period of change and transition, and we don't know what the end result is going to look like, but these are some of the steps we're going to take together. Just to outline some basic things for people helps lower their anxiety and their fear, Nick.
Okay.
That's what I
Yes.
have found. So to communicate that, and then to work with leaders who are maybe open to some spiritual practices, sharing those together. For example, in the council or in a vestry, whatever the leadership group might be called, to gather for a business meeting, but start with a half an hour of prayer or lectio divina or deep listening. And you don't always have to be the one leading that. You could ask a leader to
Okay.
share his or her perspective or their perspective on on something and go deeper with it, kind of explore that and put some roots down into God's soil there through gentle modeling, and
Yeah.
then do the business at hand. You don't neglect that, but you ground things differently and create a container for people that's a safe place to be.
Hmm.
So there's no judgment. It's safe to say what you really believe.
Hmm. So yeah, so there's so one of the things you're saying is manage anxiety through
Manage anxiety.
clear communication.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
And then the other thing I heard was, you know, be playful and experiment. Like,
Mhm.
instead of having to be, do it all, like be this super adaptive leader right away, is
Yeah.
just play with some different alternate ways of doing things, and different people being in charge, different
Yeah.
structures, and see how it goes.
Right. Just see how it goes. See how it goes and let go of the results. Just, try an experiment, let go of the results and see how you can create a different sort of environment together. So
Yeah.
I think communication is really essential. Playfulness, curiosity is essential. Clarity is essential in adaptive leadership because the goal of adaptive leadership is to create an organization that's more nimble.
Hmm. Okay, speak more about that.
Well, we don't know what's coming to us as members of the church, other than we can trust in the promises of the Holy Spirit. But I don't think God promises that our church structures are going to stay the same forever and ever and ever. So, to be open and create adaptive leaders so that if we have to close a building, if we have to merge with another congregation, if there is a pilot program that needs to get launched, we can pivot more easily because we've been practicing experimentation and adaptability. So it's just using a different muscle, but knowing that that could well be a part of the future that we'll be asked to use more often.
Yeah, I think a lot of church, systems like to stay as they are.
That's right. They get
And
static. Yeah.
and then what happens, church eventually gets to a crisis place and they're like,
Hmm.
well, I guess we'll have to adapt.
Right. Right.
Haven't built that muscle. It's like, well, now I have to run a marathon, but I haven't been
Uh-huh.
running at all.
Exactly. Yeah.
Uh,
So it's kind of like doing a little training, in
yeah.
preparation for this. Hmm.
So, I imagine that we'll have a wide range of sort of theological perspectives that are listening in on this conversation. And for
Hmm.
those that like feel like curiosity, playfulness, experimentations, those all sound like not taking the task of ministry seriously enough, right?
Hmm.
That, this is God's church,
Hmm.
right? And
Right.
then
Right.
you're asking us to be playful. I mean, what would you say to someone that's fearful that adaptive leadership is sort of too much of just, not recognizing the seriousness of the call?
Hmm. That's a great question, and I'm sure some pastors get kind of lodged there in that definition. Um, what I would say is let's just think about some of the greatest musicians in the world. Let's think about Bach. Let's think about Stravinsky and how deeply faithful they were and how they created
And
something
you too,
so. There
Bono.
we go, Bono. Okay, all of it, right? And in response to their deep and abiding faith, something wild and wonderful is born. Igor Stravinsky once said, I myself, having been created, I cannot help but create.
Mm.
I myself, having been created, cannot help but create. So there's a way in which we are born with this capacity to create, and in that process kind of play and experiment. I think we see it in creation around us, we see it in nature, we see it in children, and Jesus said, let the little children come unto me. He didn't block the flow of children, he welcomed that. And they teach us how to play in holy and faithful ways over and over again. My grandchildren who don't go to church, I will confess, sometimes one of them will go to vacation Bible school. One of them came home and said to me, Granny Hannah, let me tell you a God story. You know, it's like a God story. And he remembered the story of the raising of Lazarus. It wasn't in a church context per se, but it was through a craft, it was through a song, it was through play that he came back with this enormous story that sort of broke something open in his little heart. I love that.
Yeah, yeah. The sort of it was able to the story got contextualized in a way where he could hear it.
Yeah. Yeah. Where he could hear it, where he
Right.
could,
We do that with the Bible oftentimes, right? We're taking the stories and the principles, and then we're applying them in a contextual way so that people can understand what's
right.
being said.
Yeah.
And maybe adaptive leadership is doing the same with church structures and
Mhm.
church programs, is saying, you know what, the goals may be still similar, but
Mhm.
if you contextualize, and with the changing of um, culture and the world and the pace it goes, it, you need a way of doing that that can move over time, and be adaptive
Yeah.
rather than sort of imposing one system that is supposed to stay the same.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Are there things ministers can do to get a congregation, other than just, these little exposure stuff? What are ways that they can help a congregation understand the need for adaptation, for adaptive leadership?
Well, I served as an interim for a parish that I only had 6 months there. I was told you have 6 months to do an adaptive piece of work with this church. I really thought about it and I decided that we would have a conversation after
Hmm.
every Sunday worship. And we gathered together in the sanctuary after worship and we talked about um, what we were noticing in the building itself first, because there was not consistent messaging. There were mixed up messages. The Garden of Gethsemane was still set up, but we were in Pentecost.
Hmm.
So, you know, we were talking about these inconsistencies and I got people laughing about it. You know, it's sort of like, okay, what season are we really in? What message do we want to convey? And we met, and then they started to put together a plan, Nick, of how they could reposition things, move the altar closer to people because they were dwindling in size, kind of claim their size of congregation, and make more room for children in the sanctuary. So we did this over a 6 month period of time, really intentionally, really with a lot of intention. And it was sort of like, oh, I don't know, it was like a quick race. You know, it wasn't a marathon, although I'm sure it felt like a marathon to them, but we did it in a very gentle, loving way, and we did it together.
Hmm.
And they learned about adaptive leadership because they were invited into the space. And just talking about it, I mean, I think we can preach about it. I think we can demonstrate it. Maybe instead of preaching one Sunday, we do congregational drama and we act out the gospel story for the week. And we put it out there. The more people who are exposed to it, the better. But it doesn't need to be, you know, it doesn't need to be something people absolutely have to sign on to just to be exposed. And stories about adapting in their own lives, like everybody has to adapt at some point in life.
Mm.
So people think that they don't have the muscle, but they do,
Yeah.
right?
So one of the things is meeting the fear that they can't adapt, right? And
Yeah.
then another thing, you talked about early on about being, taking people up to the balcony, and I feel like
Yeah.
that's what you did when you showed them that they were the season in the Garden of Gethsemane, but
Yeah.
you did it in a way that wasn't being in the balcony judging like those
No,
Muppets, like
no,
right,
right.
but it was with lightness and humor, but also letting them see the perspective
Mm,
and get a little bit of a distance from the this is how we're always doing it to sort of seeing a bigger picture that maybe pastors are used to doing is looking at the big picture, but maybe less used to inviting people alongside and
yeah.
listening to what they see from
Yeah.
that balcony.
Exactly. Exactly. To change their perspective. Yeah. And put on the lens of a newcomer. What does a newcomer see when they come to visit the church? What do they see?
Yeah, and so that also gives a goal, like, why are we adapting,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think for some people it's like, well, we don't want to certain we don't want to adapt just because, the culture is changing or things like that, but I think most churches want to be a place of welcome and openness and one that people can connect with God. And when you
Yeah.
get that perspective of the newcomer, right? Like
Mm,
that's who I think who most churches are trying to be for.
that's right. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. And people are much more motivated then to consider this as a possible way of moving in that direction. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Um, what else? We're coming kind of to our end. Like, if there was something, if you're like, if people took one thing, like had one sort of action step, one like nudge in the direction that would help them manage church being so hard from that frame of sort of playfulness, curiosity, experimentation. What might be that the one little step that they could take to dip their
Mm,
toe in?
mm. I think I would encourage a church leader or a pastor to find one or two people in the congregation they really trust and meet together and make a commitment to do something playful. That's
Mm,
all. Do something playful.
yeah.
That's that's it. Just start small. Start
Mm.
small and gather just a few allies, and just know that when you see them in the congregation, that they have that on their mind, that they're thinking about, okay, we want to bring in playfulness or curiosity. How can we do that in gentle ways? Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you, Hannah,
Welcome. You're
for
welcome.
giving us that insight. I think this is something we didn't learn in seminary. It isn't something that we thought we'd have to be doing, this sort of constant, like, how do we make this work? And I think these are some really good insights. I do want to say, if this idea is new or interesting or challenging, we at the center are able to offer free coaching, 8 sessions to start. To really, if you want to have more tailored, like for your context, because of course, everybody's setting is different for how this would look. And, you can actually just go to www.ccdmin.org and you can click a button to get a code. It takes 3 minutes. And thanks to MMBB, we are able to offer, and Lily offer this free coaching. And we have lots of really qualified coaches that can help you think about how this looks in your context. So there's the plug. And
You're
but thank you, Hannah, for your
oh,
time. And
Thank you.
we'll open this up for questions or comments. But we really appreciate your time, Hannah,
Absolutely.
and
Sure.
kicking us off in this very important question about why is church so hard?
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to pause the recording.